Everybody? Okay, good evening. So yesterday we started talking about Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum. We'll carry on this evening. I mentioned that there are two, possibly three ways of understanding what this chiyuv is, what it's about, what function it serves. We spoke about the idea of Shnai Mikra being purely a function of Limud Torah, part of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, meaning that one needs to read again, one needs to understand. If one doesn't understand what they're reading, it doesn't fulfill the purpose at all, according to that approach. I mentioned the view of Rabbi Kenigsberg, whereby one would read the entire parsha once, as if not understanding, to show the Elionut, to show the superiority of Chumash, as opposed to of Mikra, as opposed to Nevi'im and Ketuvim, where with Rav Kamenetsky's Chiddush, that even if one reads the Chumash without understanding, still fulfill the mitzvah, and then read it again and understand. Tonight I want to talk about the third approach. So one thing I didn't mention last night was the Trumat HaDeshen. Trumat HaDeshen has an interesting question. It's generally thought that the Trumat HaDeshen actually asked his own questions. Sometimes you have shutim where a question was asked, you wonder, where did that question come from? Trumat HaDeshen was the way he wrote his sefer. He chose the questions, which through those he wanted to teach something, wanted to bring out certain halachic points. So he has a question to do with Shnai Mikra, to do with whether on Yom Tov, for example, is there an obligation of Shnai Mikra when it comes to Yom Tov? Because we have Kriyat Torah, we read from a certain parsha. It's not the Parshat Shavua, but it's something else. We have other times during the year, we have the Arba Parshiot, for example, where we have a special reading for Maftir, which is not part of the weekly cycle. Is one required to do Shnai Mikra on those sections as well? And he says it depends on what the function of Shnai Mikra is, why it was originally instituted, and he gives two options. He says it could be that in the same way, as we mentioned last night, the same way that we have a yearly cycle for the tzibur, that the community together has to read through the Torah from beginning to end, starting on Simchat Torah, ending on Simchat Torah. So too, each individual every year has to go through, has to read through, has to learn all the parshiot, has to read through the entire Torah cycle. The point is, you have to have been through everything. You have to have, as the Gemara said, Yashlim Parshiotav, finish all the parshiot, do it at least once throughout the year. In other words, again, it's part of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It's got to do with the fact that there should be, every individual should at least be familiar, if not, be able to master the entire Chumash. And I think, you think today there are so many daily or weekly learning programs. Baruch Hashem, that many have become very popular, many very successful. You have Daf Yomi, probably the most successful. You've got Mishnah Yomi, Halacha Yomi, Rambam Yomi, all sorts of programs. But the most successful one is Parshat Shavua, hands down. Everybody knows what Parshat is. Everybody knows whether people are doing Shnai Mikra like this or not. But there's an idea. We go through, we have the opportunity and the responsibility each week to go through to learn. That's one possibility, says Trumat HaDeshen. The other possibility is that it's not that there is an independent chiyuv to go through the Torah, each individual throughout the year, but it's in order to prepare for the weekly kriyah that's going to be in shul, in order to prepare for the kriyah that's going to be with the tzibur. We'll talk in a moment exactly what to prepare means, but the nafkaminot between them, many ramifications. So the question we began with, which is, if it's, let's say it's Yom Tov, so if the obligation is to make sure that you've gone through, you've read through every parsha, well, the parsha you're reading on Yom Tov, you'll have done when that's Parshat Shavua, and there would be no Shnai Mikra for that section. If, on the other hand, the idea is to prepare for what's going to be read in Shul, then you would have to do it on Yom Tov as well. Same thing would be for the Arba Parshiot. Another question which the poskim discuss is, does the chiyuv of Shnai Mikra extend to the Haftarah as well, which is from the Navi? If the point is you just have to go through the Torah, the Chumash every week, then obviously it wouldn't. If it's about preparing for what's going to be read in Shul, then there might be room to say that yes, there would be. And there are some poskim who say, at least recommend, that one should do Shnai Mikra on the Navi as well. Another nafkamina which comes up, very, very common question, is when we have, this happens on many occasions, when the last day of Yom Tov, the second day, Yom Tov Sheni Shogaliot, is on Shabbat. It happens at Pesach, it happened every few years. So then you have a situation whereby in Israel, it was Shabbat, so we're reading the next Parsha. In Chutz La'aretz, they were reading the Parsha of Yom Tov, and then the next week, for a number of weeks, there's a discrepancy. You have one Parsha in Israel, you have a separate Parsha in Chutz La'aretz. What happens if somebody is traveling? Post-Corona, people are traveling again, right? You go and it's a different, you switch Parashiot. Would you have to then go back if the point is that one has to just prepare, has to go through the entire Torah cycle? So then if you've already done the Parasha, you wouldn't have to go back into Shnai Mikra there again. If the point is that you need to be prepared for the weekly reading, maybe you'd have to go again. Maybe you wouldn't because you've already done it. What happens when you come back? So these are some of the nafkaminot. Another one as well is when is one required to finish Shnai Mikra? If it's got to do with preparing for the reading in shul, obviously you'd have to be finished before the reading in shul. If not, then there may be room to say you could continue the rest of Shabbat. Poskim say if one hasn't finished by Shabbat, one could finish everything by Shmini Atzeret. Okay, so those are some of the nafkamina between those two approaches. I'll just say in terms of the second approach, what does it mean to prepare for the reading? It could be that this doesn't really apply nowadays practically, but once upon a time we know when somebody was called up to the Torah, they were called up not just to stand and say the brachot, they were called up to read, and they would have to read the Kriya. And it could be that the original intention here was for one to prepare in case they get an aliyah, in case they get called up, they would have to be proficient in the reading. Rav Ovadia writes, he quotes the Radbaz, he quotes the Arizal, he quotes many poskim. He says that Shnai Mikra has to be with the ta'amim. Has to be, and he writes in a tshuva, he writes that teachers and school principals should teach the kids to learn to do Shnai Mikra with the ta'amim. It's a very strong opinion about it. Again, if we're saying that the original reason was so that one knew how to read if they got called up, that might then that sounds reasonable. Also something interesting in terms of how much do you have to read and where do you read. So we know today where the aliyot are broken up because it says in the Chumash, right? That is quite a late addition. Those chalukot, we have obviously the separation between parshiot. We have a separation between parshiot. We have a separation between what's called Parasha Ptucha and Parasha Stuma, different sections of the Chumash. The separation between the aliyot is not an ancient distinction. Gemara does not tell us where those breaks are. It gives us rules, gives us principles. That, for example, each oleh has to read at least 3 psukim, that one needs to start off with a good, with something, a good matter and end on that. Certain places where we can't have breaks or we can have breaks. The one exception to this Parashat Ha'azinu. Parashat Ha'azinu, we have the breaks set up, but it's not known exactly where these different breaks between the parashot came up. Probably somewhere in the last 400 years, somebody started printing them. It's quite remarkable that it's become such a universal custom, something that was so late that it's basically universally across all different communities, the breaks between aliyot are the same. But not the way it was originally. Somebody would get called up. Everybody knew the rules, knew the principles. They'd start reading. They'd stop wherever they decided to. Now you can imagine we have enough machlokot in shuls, and when we have everything printed in the siddur for us, when it wasn't printed, there must have been quite confusing, and that could have led to machloket, and that's probably why whoever it was decided to set up, make these chalukot distinctions for us. I'll say the Vilna Gaon, Shmon Masei Rav, was opposed to them. The Vilna Gaon did not approve of the way that the parashot was set up. He says that in some places it's not, it doesn't make sense. It's not with the same inyan and different things. Be that as it may. So the last thing I mentioned last night. Now we get to the third approach and third understanding of Shnai Mikra, which is something still part of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but something a little bit different. Mentioned last night this machloket about should one read Targum or Rashi, right? The whole point of the Targum originally was that it's a translation, it's to understand. We're now stuck in a situation where we don't understand the Targum. And as I said, this is not a new problem. The Rosh writes this already 700 years ago. Says, no, you can learn with the Perush of Rashi. and there's a debate back and forth. What's the best thing to do? The Torah, the Shulchan Aruch writes, do both. Okay? Now again, the Shulchan Aruch, when he writes that, by the way, the language that he uses is a language which doesn't use in every place, and uses in a select number of places. The Shulchan Aruch says that a Yarei Shamayim should do both. Somebody who's, in other words, this is not the Ikar Adin. This is not the letter of the law. Somebody who wants to be, go above and beyond. Somebody who wants to take on a chumrah. Somebody who wants to satisfy all of the opinions. He himself as a Yarei Shamayim is able to do it. There's advantages to reading with Targum. There's advantages to reading with Rashi. You can do both. But most people aren't going to do both. The question is, which one is better? Which one takes preference? So the Chofetz Chaim writes in an Igeret that if you don't understand Aramaic and you don't understand the Targum Onkelos and you do Shnai Mikra V'echad Targum, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. The point is to understand. You read the Torah, you read the Targum, you understand what it is. You haven't fulfilled anything. He says you read Perush Rashi. You don't understand Perush Rashi, so you find a translation that you do understand. So long as it's based on Chazal, so long as it's authentic and according to the Masorah, then that's what you do. That's how you fulfill the mitzvah. Others, Rav Ovadia I mentioned already, he writes and he quotes some of the Geonim and other poskim, say that there is, you have Shnai Mikra V'echad Targum, it's not Shnai Mikra V'echad Perush, you have to read the Targum. What if you don't understand? He says, even if you don't understand, you still have to read it. Why? Because it was given with Ruach HaKodesh. The Gemara in Megillah says that the Targum of Onkelos was given at Sinai. It's part of the transmission of the Torah, and that's what you do. So the question is, what's the logic? What's behind this? What is the point of doing Shnai Mikra V'echad Targum? If I don't understand the Targum, what is the point of doing the Targum? Just before I explain this, let me emphasize again. There are opinions that say that you can read with Perush Rashi. There are opinions that say that you can do it in a way that you understand. Everybody should do it in the way that the poskim write that this is a mitzvah, this is a chiyuv. For whatever reason, it's many are lax about it. Anything that we can do to strengthen it, whatever way it's going to be easier, it's going to encourage a person to do it, one should do. But let's just try and understand what's behind this logic of reading the Targum even if you don't understand. So the Maharal, we asked yesterday another question we haven't answered yet. Why Shnai Mikra? Why do we read it twice? So the Maharal writes, and the Pri Megadim brings us, and a number of others, Aruch HaShulchan mentions as well, says that what we are doing when we read Shnai Mikra V'echad Targum is we are replicating the process by which the Torah was given. Right? The Torah was given first at Har Sinai. Then it was taught again in the Ohel Moed. Then it was taught again a third time with the explanation, Ho'il Moshe be'elet HaTorah Azot, in Sefer Dvarim, when at Arvot Moav, when Moshe Rabbeinu then taught the Torah to the people, Ho'il Moshe be'elet HaTorah, says Rashi over there, b'shivim lashon, in 70 languages. How already at that point they were speaking 70 different languages, I don't know. But nonetheless, it was given 3 times. First at Sinai, second time at Ohel Moed, that's the Shnai Mikra. The third time at Arvot Moav with the Perush, with the explanation, with the translation, and we are in a way replicating exactly what happened. In other words, there's an idea here. Obviously, there's an element of Talmud Torah. Obviously, there's an element of learning, and although better somebody can understand, that's the aim. But there's another element here of reenacting what took place at Sinai, reenacting the way that the Torah was given, reliving through that experience, and we have that in the Kriyat Torah that we have in Betzibur, that we have in Shul. We have that when an individual learns as well. We have a number of different expressions. Over Sukkot, we spoke about Hakel. Hakel is another reenactment of this. It takes place once every 7 years, but on different levels, in different ways, all the time. The Torah tells us, right? Be very, very careful not to forget what happened at Sinai. It doesn't tell us to remember what happened at Sinai. It says, don't forget. Be there all the time. The Ramban writes in his Hasagot to the Sefer Mitzvot, how this is a mitzvat lo ta'aseh. This is a negative prohibition. Not to forget what happened at Sinai. Always to remember it. And there's an element in the same way now that when we read the Torah, it's not just about reading something, but it's about reliving that experience and receiving the Torah once again directly from Hashem. So that's what we do in Shul. That's what we try to do with our Shnai Mikra V'echad Targum. Obviously, best if one can understand it as well. never to forget, it's not just the intellectual pursuit, but it is that spiritual experience of receiving the Torah each week anew. Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha אומר, "Tzakadosh Baruch Hu lezakot Yisrael, lefichach ba'alem Torah mitzvot, shneimar